This is Bill Brady, One United Body, speaking today on the topic of sowing and reaping with respect to everlasting life. There are many areas of revelation that the law of sowing and reaping applies to. So we function in the law of sowing and reaping with respect to various truths that we are functioning in our lives, or even initially bringing into our life. One of these really important areas is the area of everlasting life. When I spoke initially in the introduction to this leadership accelerator, I spoke about both prophets and apostles having a four-step journey or process, from calling to preparation to training to sending. The same thing actually applies to sons. The same four parts of their full journey, from initially having the seed of that revelation sown into them, from them being called, having that name written upon them and having it become their identity, to them actually fully functioning in that identity. So one of the areas of our preparation for leadership, it's not just for leadership. Every believer is destined to see the revelation of everlasting life, receive it as a seed, enter into it, and do the full journey to the point that there's actually a reaping of everlasting life. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of teaching on this, and then I'm also going to point you to my Patreon, where there's detailed teaching on this. Well, I'll give you an introduction to it and show you how it's important to function in the law of sowing and reaping with respect to it. First off, I'm going to explain what everlasting life is. In most English translations, especially in the Gospel of John and 1 John, well, in John's writings, but also in the Gospels themselves, there's the phrase eternal life. And when you look at it in Greek, it's actually aionios life. And aionios, a better translation for aionios, is not eternal, it's everlasting. So there's this thing called everlasting life. Yeshua said, I am the resurrection and the life. And when he's talking about the life, he's talking initially about everlasting life. Now, I see everlasting life as being of the soul, and I see immortal life as being of the body. And I see that we begin our journey into everlasting life before we begin our journey into immortal life, and we finish our journey into everlasting life before we finish our journey into immortal life of the body. So everlasting life is of the soul. Excuse me. See, receive, enter into, overcome, inherit, possess, and the seventh and final stage or step in the journey is become, or I am. First, you see the revelation of everlasting life, and you may not have ever seen it before. Then you receive it internally into yourself as a seed. Then you enter into everlasting life, which is when you begin to function in everlasting life. Then you overcome death. There's two kinds of death, the first death and the second death. The first death is the death of your body. The second death is the death of your spirit and soul, that leads to the lake of fire, which I don't see as being a permanent place of judgment. I see it as a place of correction, getting back on the right path. So there's a full journey with respect to everlasting life. And again, you can see the whole journey on my Patreon. And you can find my Patreon by searching for Bill Brady 633 on Patreon. So I'll point you to that. My Patreon initial access is $1 per US per month. That's for people that are first checking it out, and for people who can't afford to give, frankly, can't afford to give any more than that at the current time. And then I expect that those who are able to function in the law of sowing and reaping with respect to finances will then sow back into me and move up to the $5 category. If you want to actually get current revelation that I'm posting on there, there's a $10 category. But anyway, you can get access there for $1 a month. And I won't do all the teaching that I did on there here. I have to go there to find it. Okay, but I do want to do a little teaching on this particular verse, which I'm sharing with you now from BibleGateway.com, which is something that I use rather regularly. You can search for particular terms, and then all the verses in the scripture in the Bible that have these two words, sow and reap, pop up, and I searched through them and found this particular verse. I didn't remember it was Galatians 6:8. I knew it was in Galatians, but I found the verse that way. Okay, so here we go. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. So this is functioning in the law of sowing and reaping with respect to everlasting life. There's a point in your journey where you'll actually reap everlasting life. Well, how do you do that? Well, first off, you stop sowing to your flesh, which is the part of you that desires to sin. Because when you sow to the flesh, you will reap corruption. What is corruption? It's being part of the world system made up of those who are still sinning. So we've got two different sowings. You can sow to your flesh, in which case you will reap corruption. You'll also die mortal death. Or you can sow to your spirit, in which case you will reap everlasting life and eventually reap everlasting life as of your soul, and eventually reap immortal life of your spirit. There's another kind of sowing and reaping with respect to that, which I won't teach on now, but I'll put that seed down inside you. Okay, so what happens? We come to believe in Yeshua, and this makes changes on the inside of us, but it doesn't necessarily make instant changes to what we're doing. Some things may change. So, for example, I've heard of people who are alcoholics who come to initial faith and alcoholism's gone. Other people come to initial faith and alcoholism's still there, and they need to do a journey to get free from the alcoholism. So we do a lot of sowing to the flesh. When we first come to believe in Yeshua, we're still doing a lot of sowing from what we're doing the same things we were doing as an unbeliever, with some things we've stopped and repented from some of them, but not from everything yet. So there's a process. Picture it like turning the faucet off, and the faucet is going full blast, and then you just turn it off more and more and more, so less and less water comes out, and finally you've got it turned off so nothing's coming out. That's the same thing with sowing to the flesh. You initially have it going at full blast, but you keep repenting and come to a place where you're sowing less and less to the flesh, and you eventually come to a place where you're not sowing to the flesh at all. And during this process, you initially are reaping from all the things you're sowing to the flesh, but as you sow fewer things to the flesh, you reap fewer things from your flesh, and eventually you stop reaping anything from your flesh. Now, there's a delay from when you stop to when you finally finish reaping. Why is there a delay? Because when you sow a seed, there's a process of waiting until there's the harvest of the mature grain. So you've got to wait for the things that you sowed in the past to the pipe has to stop flowing, and eventually you're no longer reaping any more things that you've sown from your flesh. You're not reaping any of that at all. You know, woohoo, this is wonderful. But at the same time, you increase, you start sowing to the Spirit, and then you increase what you sow to the Spirit. And this causes you to eventually fully reap everlasting life, the full journey. I just gave you the brief journey: see, receive, enter into, overcome, the second death, enter in, inherit, possess, and then become, be, and be able to say, I am. And when you're saying I am, it's not any longer a faith statement about what you're shooting for as a goal, because you can say I am as a faith statement, as part of your shooting for the goal of actually becoming what you're saying you are. Because in one sense you are, because you've begun the journey and you have that full identity given to you as a calling. It's written on you as a name, but you aren't fully functioning in it yet. And you haven't come to the place where you can actually produce yourself in it yet. So you sow more and more to the Spirit, more and more kinds of sowing to the Spirit by doing things that the Spirit prompts you to do, and the things that the New Testament teaches you to do. This whole process of character formation, this whole process of preparation for functioning as a prophet and apostle, and eventually you fully reap everlasting life. So I wanted to put this as a seed down into you. So John speaks in several places about having everlasting life. One who has received everlasting life as a seed now has everlasting life, and those who have everlasting life will be, if they die mortal death, will be resurrected at the second resurrection. That's all that's required. You have you be resurrected at the second resurrection. You don't have to have your life completely sorted out to be a complete candidate for the second resurrection. You have everlasting life. You are a candidate for the second resurrection. If you die mortal death, you will be resurrected when the second resurrection occurs. But there's more to everlasting life than just knowing for sure that you're going to be resurrected at the second resurrection. There's going from seeing the revelation of everlasting life to receiving the everlasting revelation of everlasting life as a seed, to enter into the revelation of everlasting life, which is an everlasting life of the soul. What is your soul made up of? Your soul is made up of mind, will, and emotions. So your thoughts start changing. The mind of Christ is part of everlasting life. Your emotions start changing, so you don't trigger the things that you did trigger to before. And your will changes, and you decide that you're going to do certain things. And, for example, sowing less to the flesh and eventually not sowing to the flesh at all. And, for example, sowing to the Spirit and eventually sowing to the Spirit in all aspects of sowing to the Spirit that you can do: mind, will, and emotions. Okay, so I've taught enough on this. I've sown the seed in you. I encourage you to receive that seed by faith right now. Just do it by faith. You may want to speak it out loud and say, I receive that seed of everlasting life as right now I receive it by faith. And depending on how perceptive you are in the Spirit, you may actually feel that seed entering into your being. It's in your heart. You may not, in which case it's entirely by faith without any evidence in the spiritual realm that you're able to discern, but you simply know that when you receive something, then it does enter into you. But you, like I said, you may also actually have a manifestation in your spirit or your soul. You may have a vision. You may have the Lord speak to you. You may just have a spiritual sense that, yeah, I can feel that seed just went down inside me. I've received it. You may actually find that you already have received it by faith without even having to actually say, I received it by faith. When I was talking about it, you actually received it. And you may also find that you received it before this time. But like I say, I just gave you an introduction to everlasting life, and there's more revelation about everlasting life. I just gave you most of it right now, but there's more details of it. I proclaimed most of it already to you, but the detailed teaching on it is found on my Patreon.